Hello there, and welcome to this vlog of February 2022. This is the second part of a series of vlogs that I'll be doing on the more weird and wonderful conspiratorial aspects of the BattleTech galaxy. And today's topic is going to be very religious in tone because I will be discussing the one star faith, who aren't that common a topic in BattleTech. Really, it's something that I personally think it's a huge shame that the writers for early BattleTech, because they obviously knew that they were going to do the clan invasion eventually. I wish they would have built more around a faith-based system that thought that the Exodus and Kerensky's SLDF was either going to liberate them from, I don't know, previous sins of the fathers or whatever, or in the case of this particular sect, which is the one star faith, would deliver them to a sort of Eden. And they did that. Obviously, the one star faith are reflective of that, but I really would have liked to have seen that fleshed out. I would have liked to have seen a cult, almost akin to something like Comstar, where, rather Comstar being the commercial entity, I would have wanted to see the religious aspect to how people would have dealt with things like the traumas of the Succession War and the Exodus, which within the kind of BattleTech galaxy or experience, whatever you want to say, we can't put a quota on how traumatic that will have been to the populace. Having that military who just liberated you from this horrifying tyrant and a war that just killed just an insane amount of people. Up overnight, they just disappeared. I mean, it's like the ultimate conspiracy theory. It's like the Loch Ness Monster plus Kennedy, plus the Bay of Pigs, plus the Illuminati, plus every other conspiracy theory you can think about times 10,000, because it actually happened. It's not something I don't know, the Loch Ness Monster, where it's just loads of quirky Scottish people trying to get tourism rates, something like that. This is actually a thing. This is people, if you were in the military, the chances are you knew someone who had ventured into the unknown and just left everything that they knew and loved behind them. Geopolitically, obviously, it caused a massive impact on the inner sphere. It basically destroyed a nation, more than a nation, a huge area of space, a very powerful entity as well in the the Terran homogeny. I always struggle with that word, by the way. But the SLDF going basically broke that down and destroyed that entire, I'll call it a nation just for the sake of ease. But you also got the creation of Comstar in the aftermath, and that obviously has huge legacy problems for everything in BattleTech, because the Comstar are all-knowing, all-seeing, and talked about this on the previous episode that I did on interstellar expeditions, kind of give a little bit of an intro into Comstar and how omnipresent they are in the BattleTech universe. And they come about because of the the exodus of the SLDF. Kerensky basically makes a deal with Jerome Blake, where they will kind of mask their disappearing into the periphery. If they basically, the Comstar is created out of that deal. I won't go into that, it's not relevant to this topic. But what I'm saying is the SLDF disappearing out into nowhere just had massive ramifications, politically, socially, and religiously as well. And I think something like the one star faith is super interesting, and it's a shame it wasn't built up more. And there's not much to say on them because of that, because they are kind of a bit of almost like a footnote in the BattleTech universe. But what's more interesting about them is, if you can flesh that out and you can imagine that a society was dealing with its trauma by turning to a religious cult effectively, because that's what they are. It's not a million miles away from the New Age cults that we have today. It's born out of a charismatic leader, although in this case he was a bit of he was one of those leaders who didn't really want it, but nevertheless he was kind of pedestaled and people followed him. a chap called Simon Kruger, and this is a faith that all kind of orientates around the Lyran Commonwealth on Graceland. I think that's where it kind of started up. Fitting name that for the start of a religion, Graceland. So, but I'm not. I will touch on what the one star faith is as like an entity. But again, what is really interesting is the notion that a religion springs up out of like a geopolitical event, which is effectively the trauma of three things: the Ameris Civil War, the Exodus in of itself, and the horror of the Succession Wars. So those three things came together and formed something like the one star faith. And like I said, I just think it's a real missed opportunity for like the writers to really develop that. I'm probably saying that with my kind of anthropologist's hat on. Again, if you watch the previous episode, I did talk a little bit about, training as an anthropologist when I was like a young man. So I've kind of, religion is something within anthropology that's like centrifugal, like to understand the human experience and journey. I'm talking like individually and collectively here. Like you really do need to kind of understand how religion works because it's so fundamental to the human experience. I'm not talking about like the bells and whistles of religion. I'm talking about the kind of emotional element that exists within the human psyche to kind of interpret symbols, or if you kind of want to take like the Jungian approach of like the collective unconscious, like those kind of symbols that we all draw upon to make like reference to things that happen in either our personal lives or as a society. And then there's an argument to suggest that's kind of how religion is born to some extent. It's like through that like collective understanding of symbols. And the one star faith really kind of emphasizes that they were born out of that like collective symbol, which was the SLDF, which was completely like, idolized within like the inner sphere. They were like the heroes, and then they just upped and left. And what I think the one star faith really like demonstrate is that like social anxiety that exists as you're kind of going through the succession wars in particular, where it's like it's never ending, like for like 300 years, not that long, but for a substantial amount of time, there is just like this war after war after war, this just like meat grinder, destructive in every possible sense of the word. They destroy technology, they destroy their own industrial might, they destroy the fabric of their own society, and for literally nothing. It's kind of the World War like equivalency, where you had like men being thrown into a meat grinder for the sake of like a few yards of like land. The succession wars were very, very similar to that, but like on a scale completely unprecedented in like human history. And so you can well understand why something like a religion would spring up from that. And I don't mean this in negative to religion, but that collective trauma. And collective trauma is usually how religion is born. If you think about something like Christianity, and I was kind of, I am kind of a cafeteria passive Catholic because I was brought up that, but I'm certainly not a practicing Catholic. But if you go into a Catholic church, which is kind of what I know best, you'll see the Jesus on the cross, basically being tortured, and that kind of collective suffering that I think was kind of born out of the like the Roman Empire's cruelty, lingers today. I mean, I had an old anthropology teacher who used to talk about things like, which I believe is a James Joyce quote from Ulysses, where he talks about the nightmare of history and like trying to wake up from the nightmare of history. So like every time you go into a church as a Christian and you see this like, man being tortured on the cross, you are engaging in like a nightmare of history that you can't break free of. And again, I'm not saying this as an anti-religious thing. I'm saying this as that's part of the human condition. I'm saying that as an anthropologist, that we all suffer from that, whether it's collective trauma or pain or individual trauma or pain. Like something might happen to you in your life that you literally can't get over. You might be suffering some form of like post-traumatic stress disorder, like individually, but we as a society certainly deal with that collectively. Think about like the stories that whatever nation you are from tells. those kind of collective stories will usually be based in like some kind of trauma, whether it's like war or maybe like an internal regime that were like dictatorial, or even worse, like murdered people. We linger with those. So even though we might not necessarily go through them in our own personal lives, we know that our like direct ancestors, whether it's like your grandparents, your great grandparents, or a little bit before that, they dealt with that trauma. Ergo, it's kind of omnipresent in your psyche. And in a sense, I think BattleTech, like, I know it's very easy just to kind of equate it with this, like, it was a game designed by engineers and it's got like the fluff around it. I actually think that fluff is a lot more elaborate and sophisticated than people realize. And I think the SLDF are absolutely the heart of that, as they are the heart of BattleTech in general. Their story is the story of BattleTech. Like the clan invasion is kind of the horror and realization of what was once a dream. And I think something like the One Star Faith, I think it's just a shame that they never really got built on, because I think going back to that like James Joyce quote that when will we awake from the nightmare of our history? Well, just imagine the trauma that you would have suffered if you were part of a faith that thought that Kerensky was the way, so to speak, and then these warmongering clans came from the outer end of nowhere with this horrifying weapons and technology you've never seen before, and just cut through your civilization like a hot knife through butter. Like, the trauma that will have caused will have been just immeasurable. And that's the one mistake I think they made with the clan invasion. It should have been far more traumatic. Like, it shouldn't have just been, eventually people just got on with it and cracked on with their lives. Like, the absolute detritus that will have come from that invasion would have gone on for generation after generation. It would have broken so many people. And I think, in a sense, because it is a gaming system and they were just continuously trying to kind of roller coaster on to the next event, they really missed out. Like, the clan invasion for me should have been like a 50-year affair. It should have gone on for a long time. I'm not talking about the war. I'm talking about like the ramifications. In BattleTech, it goes on for a decade. Kind of, it finishes with like Operation Bulldog, basically, which is where they go and basically annihilate Smoke Jaguar. And that's kind of that result is basically like an Inner Sphere win. Although it's a very costly win, it's still kind of the Inner Sphere do triumph. But again, I would have liked to have seen more of like development of like the sociological aspects. I think there are so many interesting stories to tell in that. And it's one of the reasons why I think, as within my own like BattleTech experience, I find it very hard to kind of get over like the FedCom civil war and beyond that, because it's like they move from like the clan invasion, which for me has just got so many connotations to it, as like on an emotional level. If you know BattleTech and you know that like what happened in the Succession Wars, going back to like the American Civil War, and that, like I say, that horrifying like delivery of what should have been a dream just turning so poisonous. They went from that to the Jihad Word of Blake thing, which just completely like decimated. Or for me, it completely decimated the universe, because it was one of those like narratives that was just, for me, born out of necessity to continue a gaming system, which I just think is a really, really poor decision. I think they know deep down as well it's a poor decision. They might not be able to publicly say it, but I'm sure the people writing for this now just regret everything about like post-FedCom Civil War, because it really did kind of butcher the franchise. And it was kind of like, oh, well, now the clans are a thing and they're just going to amalgamate into the Inner Sphere. That just would not have happened. The anger and the hatred towards the clans would have just been absolute by the Inner Sphere. I feel that as someone who is like a bit of an Inner Sphere fanboy, especially for like, the Fed Sons. And I've got, to an extent, all the Inner Sphere powers, I think, have got like a romantic aspect to them, and I enjoy them all on a certain level. And I've spoken about that before. Like, it's far more complex than like, oh, Capellan's bad, Karita bad, Lyron's good, whatever. They're all in their own right, just trying to kind of deal with a very bad hand that they got dealt. Much like, again, going back to like I was talking about World War One earlier, it's very easy to like criticize World War One generals, and a lot of them do deserve criticism because they were throwing men into a meat grinder, but they were just men and women trying to kind of resolve a situation that they'd never seen before. Like, they'd never had like technology like that, and like the technology of the guns was like here, and then the technology of like the poor men was like, oh, their defense was here, because you can't use armor against that. Eventually they did use a form of armor in tanks, but before that it was like no one knew what to do. It was like, we need to take the land, but we can't take it, so dig a trench. And the succession wars were kind of that. It was just like, it was the fallout of this geopolitical situation with, let's be frank about it, Kerensky was to blame for this. Like, Kerensky is a very honourable man, but in a lot of ways he's a very naive, selfish individual who, at the point where he needed to take the most responsibility, decided to out. And it's very complex, because he was doing that to protect his own men and women under his command, because he felt like they'd seen too much of the horrors of war. But his action, I mean, if you could like reincarnate Kerensky in 3060 and show him what his decision had made, I guarantee he would have stayed. He would have just thought, well, the 6 million men and women under my command are a worthy sacrifice if we can sort this out and not have the untold countless millions that died across the succession wars and the clan invasion. So, it's that like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of thing here. Like, Kerensky absolutely thought that him going and taking the SLDF with him would have liberated the Inner Sphere, because they wouldn't have been able to call on the power of the SLDF, which were just this really hardened battle force with this amazing technology, and there would have been a fight over who was going to get access to them, and it would have caused chaos and pain and terror, but that chaos and pain and terror might have gone on for 30 years, and then it would have settled down, and you might have had another Star League being born out of that. Instead, you had 250 years of the succession wars, followed by the clan invasion, and again, that out of that trauma, so we'll get on topic a little bit now, into the one star faith and what they were. It's kind of, I'll read the quote. The best way to kind of to give a description on this is to read like the famous quote by the founder who said this. I'm going to look over here as well, because it's on one of my other screens. So, myriad stars awash in the sea of black space, I saw instead a single star. This one star burned blue with purity. About this truthful star was a world, and about this world, so green and inviting, were the long abandoned ships of General Kerensky. Now, what this was, this Simon Kruger, I'm not sure how to pronounce his second name, we'll say Kruger, he had this like vision, dream, whatever you want to call it, about this this green Eden, where he felt like Kerensky had gone. Obviously, they knew nothing about what came of the SLDF when he was having this vision. And in a sense, what was born out of that was it was very cult-like, and it was one of those, like I say, there's like new age connotations like this, like if you study something like Scientology, where there's almost that promise, or well, I suppose all religions do this, I don't know why I pick on Scientology, but like, Scientology is kind of a new age faith, which has got like levels within it, and to kind of, you have to go up like a computer game, like you have to go up those levels to find the truth. And in a sense, like the one star faith was a little bit like that, but different in that they were on like their own exodus. So they kind of travelled on like a pilgrimage to find Kerensky, to find their Eden. And it did pick up traction, and was like, a relatively strong like faith. Like I said, I think it should have been written stronger. I think it should have been something that became like omnipresent within BattleTech and permeated all the different like powers. Like there were worlds that were just given over to the one star faith and things like that. I think that would have caused far more like drama by the time the clan invasion came, because by by the time the clan invasion did come, obviously it shattered the illusion that was this religion. But then something very, very ironic happened in that the clans actually adopted the faith, which is very... it seems unusual prima facie, but when you actually think about it, that makes a lot of sense, because they are the direct descendants of the SLDF, and this was a faith based around the SLDF delivering humanity to an Eden. So there was an aspect of that within clan culture that really kind of took off. It also, worth pointing out that religion in the clans is quite a complex thing, because it's a very, very, how does one say this? It's a very, obtuse society, and a very closed society. So obviously there's a caste system in there. So a religion would generally kind of really, permeate amongst those, and I hate this term, but, those lower classes. People not in the warrior class, people not in the merchant class, people who were basically the losers of the clan system, of which there are many. Clan civilization is, and I say this as an anthropologist who studied quite a lot of cultural systems. The clan culture is pretty despicable. It's up there with the worst of all human cultures that you can imagine. Having a caste system, firstly, is one of the kind of giveaways that it's rotten to the core. So if you've got a system like that, you obviously, people from those like lower echelons of society trying to find an out, and religion is one of the outs that they can usually get. So something like having the clans are good, so I'm not going to kind of overtly go against my own civilization or society here, but I am going to venture onto something else, which is trying to find the Eden that Kerensky wanted us to find. So you can kind of just turn it around a little bit and manipulate it and turn it into your own kind of thing. So it did resonate with the clans, which I find super interesting. There isn't much more to say about them, really, and so this really is like a treatise on my on my own experience of religion and the symbolism that exists within religion, and how it does permeate in BattleTech with things like the One Star Faith, which is, again, for me, just such a shame that they never really fleshed it out. But what I'll do, though, is I'll finish this up by kind of giving a bit of a real world historical analogy to how I think what kind of ties together the trauma of the inner sphere, the creation of religion, and how religion really kind of changes the human condition. And the real world example I'll give, and you have to bear with me on this one because it's very anthropological, but in a sense, this is what I'm going to say here is a mirror of what happened to the Star League to some extent, going from the Exodus through to the clan invasion, and using a real world example to do it. And that example is we have to go back right to the dawn of mankind to do this. Now, I will say that and this is kind of a debated fact. So the figures that I give out here are, I'm just rounding them up, for one, and there is argument in the scientific community about when this actually happens. It's very, very difficult to actually, you can carbon date it, but it's still, put it this way: the human species as we know it has been around approximately 7 million years, and we as a civilization, that's a civilization. So that if you define civilization by saying it's a civilization is when you basically you can judge it by how much power it creates and its food output. So a civilization kind of comes about the second we start to harness power in the form of solar energy and water to grow crops. So the second you do that and you kind of build your little village around, or tribe around that's a civilization. That's where civilization starts. That happened approximately 10,000 years ago. So think about that in terms of the human journey. 7 million years to 10,000 years that we've kind of, and think about that number has always boggled my mind, to think how much the species has done. We have literally harnessed nature in that 10,000 years. We were around for 7 million years though, living in caves and trees and foraging for food. But eventually, obviously, when civilization kind of kicks off, that's a very, very new experience for like humanity as far as its overall journey goes. But so anyway, 7 million years we were kind of languishing in Africa. I think it's in and around Congo, isn't it, that they kind of think that they like Homo sapien kind of became what we like know today. And you have then, oh well, no, that's not true. It's complex because obviously evolution then becomes a thing. So what has always been a thing, but you can say that like humanity as like a genome, whatever you want to say, has been around about 7 million years. About 1 million years ago, though, something happened and the species started to migrate north. So it basically like went into like North Africa. There's like there's so many different theories about this. There's something like called like the Matriarch Theory, which was like all human beings basically spawned from something like 5 women, something like that. You know, if you kind of go through the genome, like right back to this time period, like it was like 5 tribes that basically had their own exodus and like went into like the Middle East. You then, and this is like human history is like it starts with these like massive lofty time periods, like I say 7 million years, 1 million years. I'm now going to talk about 500,000 years, which is when they kind of split off and one group went to Europe and one group kind of went into the Middle East and Asia. So these periods, you see, they slowly get like tighter and tighter. That's kind of very like true to the human experience in general. So effectively then, 500, like I said, 500,000 years, you get part of the species going up into Europe. This is at a time period as well where we had like competition within our own species, oh well, subspecies. So you have things like the Neanderthal, which were predominantly found in Europe. The Homo sapien were just better suited or more adaptable than Neanderthal. Though the theory is that we actually bred with Neanderthal, which maybe explains my forehead. Who knows? Very sloped forehead, a bit like a Neanderthal. And I did like to play rugby when I was a kid, so who knows? But you know, you can kind of, that was probably a thing because we were kind of subspecies of each other, so like not a million miles away at all. Or more likely we just kind of warred on them and killed them all. That was probably a thing as well. This is the interesting thing though, and this is kind of where I'm going to get back on track now with kind of, this is a historical analogy. The estimate is that, you know, again, so 500,000 years getting into Europe, within like a million years they'd kind of populated through Asia. But the interesting thing is that humanity only really arrived in what we now know as the Americas about 12,000 years ago. And it only took them 2,000 years to actually populate north to south. So that's literally from like Alaska, you know, down to, which is where they came in, by the way, presumably through like the frozen straits and went from Russia to America. And then, although I was saying that the geography may have been different at that time, there might have been like a land strip, not too sure. But they got right down into South America and created those like Mesoamerican cultures that we know today, like, you know, the Incas and the Aztecs, obviously like the Native Americans as well. So they're like a super new, right? In terms of like the human journey, like you're talking like 12,000 years. And then in that time period, like I said, 10,000 years is when like civilization was like spawned out of the Middle East. So kind of like by the Euphrates River. And that's where it really like kicked off. That's the spark. The second that they started to kind of grow crops was the second that you kind of didn't have to forage, which meant that you could like plant down and say, well, we'll just stay here because we know what we're doing and we've got like a regular food source. You then find that humans start to store food. So that then creates like an abundance of extra energy in terms of like people's nutrition, which means then that people need new things to do. So they're not just going to be foraging or hunting. They need to do things like create a legal system or an education system or writing, things like that. So then you get the second you do that as well, it just kind of absolutely explodes. And within, you know, 10,000 years, you have mobile phones and, you know, computers and YouTube and BattleTech and things like that. So generally quite in fact, definitely a good thing, especially over the last like 100 years. Like the people's standard of living has never been higher in, especially like the Western world, whatever you want to call it. So positives for sure. But where am I going with this in terms of BattleTech? Well, if we go back to that little kind of timeline that I gave there, 500,000 years ago, there was a tribe that split from the others, right? So I think about this. It's quite a romantic notion, but it probably will have been this. There will have been like 2 or 3 tribes that kind of knew one another and were kind of on that same journey over like generation after generation after generation. They will have been trading with each other. They will have been, warring with each other at times. But generally, like maybe peace offerings were made by like giving members of your tribe to their tribe, so that then they had, sounds a bit disgusting this, but like fresh stock to breed with, because otherwise you end up with like very insular, taboo societies, because obviously like interbreeding, he's not seen as a healthy thing. That was one of the taboos of human culture, was like like incest. So you'd always want to kind of, if you could, like marry your son or daughter off to the other chief, or the other tribes like people, so that you knew that they'd have more like genetic variety, which obviously leads to none of the host of problems that you get with like breeding between families, which has always been a taboo in human civilization, by the way. So you then get this. What I love though is this idea that there was a tribe or a group of tribes who kind of knew each other, and one decided to go west into Europe, and one decided to go east. And I have this like romantic notion, and this is like literally 500,000 years ago. And if you think about that on a time scale, by the time that like the ones that went west got into Europe, right, and settled, and maybe like on the Spanish Peninsula, and the ones that went east, some of those people will have gone into America, gone right down into create like, maybe were like founding members of like some Mesoamerican tribes. And 500,000 years later, a ship carrying Spanish conquistadors got onto like the American shoreline, and old Hernandez or whoever with his pike gets on the beach and sees a Mesoamerican, and that is literally like his, nth degree million great grandmother's like ancestor 57 times removed, but nonetheless they are still related. What separates them is an ocean of time. And obviously when they met each other, it was catastrophic for one civilization. It's no, I'm not over-egging this. The Spanish, well, not just the Spanish, the European cultures decimated the Mesoamericans. It's one of the great tragedies that we see in anthropology. You hear this a lot by anthropologists who say it's such a tragedy that it was our ancestors who were just so superstitious and blinded by dogma who met them, as opposed to, if we'd have met them now, well, would we have been any better? Maybe not. Well, I'll put it to you this way. I think there would have been a huge push by, for want of a better term, like the humane lobby to kind of not do what like our ancestors did to them, which was effectively murder them en masse. And we lost a lot of these like cultures, and really quite like brilliant cultures as well, in terms of the, if you look at like the Mesoamericans and like the stonework they had, and they were, like I said, they were relatively new as well. So it would have just been, I always think it's a fascinating thing to think where those cultures would have gone of their own right if we'd have just allowed them to kind of progress. But alas, we'll never know. What you have instead, obviously, is these two people meeting who basically demonized each other. So I say that one, I would have guessed the Mesoamericans were probably in awe of the Spanish because of their like weaponry and armor and things of that nature. The Spanish, though, generally saw them as like heathens and less than human. That kind of went with like most European ethoses against these, like, for want of a better, well, it's a controversial term, but like the Aboriginal people that they came across. And in a sense, like, I always say, if you could go back in time, if you could like build a time machine and go back to that very point where Spanish conquistador meets Mesoamerican, and you could come out and you could speak both their languages, and you sat them both down and said, listen, I know what you've been taught, that like, Spanish, you have this thing about God and like religion, and that these people are like not human beings or whatever else. And Mr. Or Mrs. Mesoamerican, I know you think these people have kind of descended from the heavens as some like godlike. They're not. They're just really like aggressive, belligerent human beings. And if you told them the truth of what the situation was, if you told them like 500,000 years ago, you were both, or your ancestors were both in a tribe that split. One decided for whatever reason to go west because maybe they thought there was better water over there. One decided to go east because he liked the look of the hills over there. That would have absolutely blown their minds. Like the reality of that situation is far more interesting and complex than the actual what they thought about it on like the dogmatic religious aspect, which was, like with the Spanish looking at them and thinking, well, are they even human? I mean, that was a debate that there was going on. Yes, they are human. Not only are they human, they are your direct lineage from the same ancestral like farm that you come from. But they obviously didn't know that. So we've got to kind of give them some, leeway on that. It's a very different time, very different like understanding of reality and everything else. Now, where I'm going with it, I know I went off on a big tangent there, but this is how traumatic I think this is why I think religion would have really sprung up out of the Exodus. Because what I said there, when I was talking about that like little analogy between those two people meeting on that beach, they had no idea what was going on. The trauma and the terror of the poor inner sphere people, they knew exactly what was going on. Like when the Wolf's Dragoons told everyone, actually, this is the SLDF come back in this terrifying form. Oh, and by the way, we're kind of part of them, but we haven't told you. Sorry, guys. Good luck with the defense because you're going to need it. These people are crazy. Imagine that is the equivalent of like someone going back in time, meeting those two people on a beach and telling them what the actual truth of the situation is. Well, the people in the inner sphere knew that. They knew, like people in the one star faith, they might have had people who were in this religion for hundreds of years, and their entire like reality comes crashing down upon them. The actual promise that they were kind of gifted and have been chasing for so long, they know now the truth. They know the horror that the SLDF not only survived but turned into this monstrous group of they call themselves the clans, obviously, people, whatever you want to call them, who then like turned their guns. It wasn't just like they came back and they were disappointing. That would have been bad enough in its own right. They came back and they literally went through the inner sphere like a hot knife through butter, killed lots and lots of people, committed multiple war crimes. And just, like I said, just imagine that trauma if you knew. It's worse to know, right? Like I said, living in ignorance as a Spanish conquistador, when you've just murdered an entire civilization, is far easier if you can kind of use the whole like God shield of, well, they're all heathens anyway, so we'll do what the hell we want with them. If they knew that like the truth of this was far more elaborate and crazy and interesting, and that you were directly related to these people at a point in time, imagine like that world. Imagine that. I genuinely think that would have changed absolutely everything if you could kind of insert that knowledge into the brain of both those like sets of people. They would have had a completely different experience when they kind of came across one another. Yes, they would have still been exploited. Like the Spanish would have still been like, yeah, okay, that's nice, but can we have your gold? Like, I'm not being idealistic about it, but what I'm saying is the truth of that reality is far more interesting than what they actually thought. I equate this to again, I'm going off on tangents galore today, but hey ho. I equate this to like our ancestors who used to look at the stars. So like when they kind of used to look at stars, and they used to, you people would say things like, well, it's like pinpricks in the celestial blanket, right? And it's like the light shining down from the heaven that come through this thing, or whatever other reason that like our ancestors gave, for stars. The truth of what stars are is far more incredible than that, right? Like they are gaseous giants floating billions upon billions of miles away in an endless void of like a galaxy, of which is just one galaxy amongst countless billions of other galaxies in what we call the universe. The truth of that is so overwhelming and insane that it's actually much, in a sense, it's us knowing that, I think, causes a lot of like existential terror to modern people. Like, yes, it's super interesting, and if you take it with like a as a matter of interest in terms of like your human experience, and it's a real privilege to know that information, then you can really get like benefit from that. But really, is it easier just to think they are just like pinpricks in the celestial blanket? Because that's far more easy to understand. And it's the same again for what happened with the clan invasion. I think that where the writers really went wrong on this is it needed to be so much more impactful. Like you literally needed to have the inner sphere civilizations breaking down over this. Like it should have just created like the ultimate in existential crisis. And I think they could have really done that in and around the One Star Faith. I think that would have been a really like interesting direction to go. So again, it's not a body within this like series of topics where there is much to talk about. It's not like the Minnesota tribe where it's like this really elaborate like conspiracy theory that's got loads of like dark webs attached to it, and you don't know what they're doing and why they're doing it. This is more of a an analogy for what goes on within like the human experience across the human journey when we are like faced with these realities that are so much more incredible than the actual like myth or the legend. And I think my love for BattleTech is born out of that the writers captured that so beautifully when it's like the SLDF and that like hundreds of years went by and the trauma of them coming back. I just wish that they've kind of turned that up to 11. And I really think they could have done that through the One Star Faith. I think it was a missed opportunity. And then I think they pushed the narrative on too much. Too quickly. So you kind of went right from like the clan invasion, Operation Bulldog, fine, Fedcom Civil War then, which I think was too soon, really. Like I think the clan invasion needed to go on for longer. That trauma needed to kind of permeate longer within the psyche of the inner sphere and the BattleTech galaxy as a whole. Anyway, hopefully that didn't bore you to tears. I find that topic like super interesting, and I love kind of comparing like really in-depth, interesting like narratives, like what I mean, I'm in love with the BattleTech universe. I think it's absolutely incredible. And I love comparing it to like real world things because I genuinely think that the people who were writing for this knew like kind of what I'm talking about here. But they were kind of constrained by it being a gaming system that needs to kind of continually evolve. And I think in a sense, what I'm kind of cathartically doing now is kind of adding my own voice to like the BattleTech like universe and the area that I really like anyway, to kind of like flesh that out a little bit and kind of say actually the clan invasion is so much more interesting and traumatic and dramatic than just like, you know, machines and a warring like tribal system effectively, which is what they are, kind of making their way across the inner sphere. Like the sociological fallout from it will have just been absolutely catastrophic for all concerned, including the clans, especially after they failed. I mean, that should have sent like real like shockwaves through their society as well, which it did. Obviously, you had things like like Clan Novacat effectively siding with the inner sphere and then going like full hog to aid in the destruction of their fellow clan Smoke Jaguar. So it did they got that bit right, I think, like with how the clans like had to really adapt to life. It wasn't just like they took this empire and won the day. It very much kind of, you know, it permeated over a decade period of time where they kind of got into it and they were like really disrespectful and horrible towards the inner sphere and saw the, you know, like, well, as clan culture is, because it's caste based and it looks down on people. It's a horrible, horrible culture and there's no other way to put it, and they're all horrible. Like I know there's this kind of thing like, oh, you know, Clan Ghost Bear are okay, and, you know, Clan Novacat, well, they sided with the right team eventually. It's like, yes, but they're a despicable civilization. And I think what I would have preferred to, and this is going to sound quite extreme, but I would have preferred to see like a 50-year period of the Inner Sphere just decimating clan culture. Like literally, like we are so horrified and angry at what you like at this broken promise. Like that's how it would have gone. Like, and it should have been led by something like the One Star Faith. Like they should have been the ones like the old, people who followed that religion, who saw the breaking of their effectively the breaking of their covenant, should have been the ones like spearheading the war against the clan cultures. I think that would have been my direction that I would have taken it in. And I'd have really forced it out over a long, long period of time. But instead, we got the word of Blake. So, hey ho. Anyway, I'm going to end that there. So, hopefully, again, you enjoyed that and didn't find it too boring. I know that I can go off on some crazy tangents, but I'm not going to apologise for that because these are just thought pieces where I just kind of give my opinion. There's no editing, obviously, so you just get this like raw and unabridged. And I hope it gives you something to think about. Anyway, the next time you are playing with the clans, have that in your mind that that story arc of the journey that they went on to get there. It's not just about big stomping machines going to war with the Inner Sphere. It's far more complex than that. Anyway, I'll thank you very much for watching. There will be another episode on the weird and wonderful, crazy aspects of the BattleTech universe next time. Probably got another 2 or 3 in me, but we'll see. But that will certainly be up by next weekend. So hopefully this finds you all well, and I'll see you next time.